In this video, I want to give you a really short history. Well, I mean, it's a very long history, but I'm going to give you a very short version of the history of the mind. As Graham Hancock put it, we are a species that suffers from amnesia. And he went off in a kind of different direction with different societies. And what I'm talking about is we forget the mind is only an amazingly recent phenomenon. And so we assume like it's been in the neighborhood forever, and it really hasn't. When I talk about the mind, of course, I'm always talking about the thinking mind, the linguistic mind, the voice in the head, the problem solver that does occasionally solve a problem or two, but also uh, is so obsessed with problem solving, it creates more problems than it solves. So let's start off with this couple ideas. And all the dates I'm going to give you, this is all comes from an outstanding book, Sapiens, that is really a history of the mind. And if you want, you can get there's a version of it on Blinkist that's only 20 minutes, but you miss out on a lot of the cool pictures and stuff and a lot of the details. In fact, so I'm just going to I'm breaking down an even shorter version. But it starts off with a really good visual. So imagine the history of the Earth, and it would be starting on your tips of your fingers on your left hand, and it ends or works its way up to modern day at the tips of your fingers on your right hand. So that's the history of Earth. If you really wanted to find out how long humans have been around, you'd need an extremely powerful microscope because we've only been around such a really, really short time. And that's one of those things about the mind. It sort of like makes it feel like, look, this is our home, but we really just moved into the neighborhood. It's kind of like the truck is still outside and we haven't even unpacked. And so here's a couple of dates. Again, you're not tested on this, so but they are kind of interesting as far as the mind is concerned. It's like learning about its own history. So about 2.5 million years ago, humans first started walking the earth. And we had a lot of different forms, some of them like Homo erectus or Neanderthals, you might sound familiar to. But it really wasn't until 300,000 years ago that our form of humanity, what we call Homo sapiens, started walking the planet. So 300,000 years ago, it's such an infinitesimally small amount of time that it literally, um, the mind itself has a very difficult appreciating how short a time the mind has actually been on the planet. But we're not even up to the point of mind yet. And so maybe we were Homo sapiens, but we didn't really have the thinking mind that we know today. In fact, it wasn't until what people call the cognitive revolution, which was somewhere between 40,000, I always pick 40,000 years ago, but some people say it was 70,000 years ago. And that's when we saw this cognitive explosion, where we saw two things happening with the human species. We started making really complex tools and we started talking. And now the interesting thing about tool making is that most of the world's population, 80+% of the world's population, of course, is right-handed, which is controlled by the left brain. So when we started making tools, of course, it's really the product of a very motivated, ambitious left brain that wants to get out and change the world. And it did in really profound ways. So when you think about what a short of time we've been here and all the major changes we've made, it's incredibly impressive. But the other thing, not just tool making, but we also started with language. And when you think about how language, the power language had to change the world with this cognitive revolution, think of it as like really the first wireless system of communication. Up until then, human beings either learned from direct experience or you watched someone else have an experience. And so it was pretty direct. But when we got this thing called language, it was really a way to kind of like wirelessly transmit an idea I have into your brain. And you can just imagine how effective that was in terms of being what, that's why they called it the cognitive revolution. That's why Homo sapiens, so many of our competitors were bigger, stronger, and faster, but we won this because here we are. And we won this competition because of the very first. So we can go back to about 40 to 70,000 years ago. That's when the mind formally moved in upstairs. This voice in the head, this kind of like dominating force that we've cultivated in Western society to the point that now we're just kind of like, okay, well, you've been around for a really long time. When do I get a break? And so we've started so many different forms of meditation to try to literally ease the presence of the thinking mind. So I just wanted to go up to like 70,000 years ago. So that's just, then maybe I'll do another video on this. I didn't want to go too long. But when you consider again the vastness of the planet itself, and then the infinitesimal time the humans spent on the planet, and then the even smaller time that Homo sapiens spent on the planet, then even the smaller amount of time that we've had this thinking machine up in our skulls, and it's been there for 40 to 70,000 years. And the point is that it hasn't really had any updates, and so we're still dealing with that software that sort of found its home in our skull a long time ago. And so I do a lot of work on what are we going to do with this. And so maybe I'll do a second part on this, which is, well, what's the point and what do we do with it?